Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tool Studio, and today I'm going to be sharing a ring project video where I'm working with fancy ice flower cut gems. Today's ring project video is going to cover another way that you can go about setting your stones in precious metal clay. I really love the way that this setting style lets a lot of light into the stone, really amplifying all the sparkle in these beautiful ice flower cut gems. Here are the tools that you need to have handy for this project: a hot plate, some silicone ring mandrels, cool slip, a clay board, a mini palette knife, a pair of tweezers, an ultra clay pick, and the mint and pink precision hole punches. A brush for dusting, a scalpel, some EZ960 syringe, and I'm working with the mint colored tip today, a medium grit sanding stick, a snake maker, some sanding pads, a dish for water, and a brush for applying water. Some clay thickness rolling frames, EZ960 lump clay, and then the Guardian Star Finishing Touches mold. I'm also going to be working with some tough cards, a tissue blade, a miter cutting vise, a stone setting burr, and a drill bit. You're also going to want to pick out one of the 8mm Asher ice flower cut stones. There are 4 colors that can be co-fired with our EZ960 clay, and today I'm going to be working with this lovely purple, and then I chose a lavender for my accent settings to kind of play off that purple color, and these are a 2mm round stone. So we're going to start off by making the seat for our setting, and just so we have a sense of where we're headed today, this stone is going to be kind of uniquely set in that usually when we're setting our stones in precious metal clay, we want to make sure the girdle is beneath the clay, but in today's setting, the stone's going to be resting in the seat with the girdle above the clay, and then we're going to be applying the finishing touches on the sides there to act as what's holding the stone in place. So today we're just making that seat, and we're starting off kind of like how we normally do when we're setting our stones, by picking out our stone and making sure that our setting is going to be the correct depth. So I've got my stone here, I'm sliding my snake maker across, and it's not moving. If I were to remove my 2 cards here, it's scooting around, that wouldn't be deep enough. So today I've got 24 cards thickness is how deep you need to make the setting for the 8x8 Asher. So I've got these all stacked up, and I'm going to get some clay. So I'm grabbing some clay, and I'm going to be pushing down to create a little patty for the setting. And then I'm going to be working with the pink precision hole punch first. I'm going to prep it with a little bit of cool slip. I'm going to give myself a place to position this stone. And then I'm again pushing straight down. Then at this point, I'm going to move this to a tough card, and then I'm going to take some more of the cool slip and I'm going to apply it to this tissue blade by running my finger down. I don't want to be dragging up against this blade because it is pretty sharp. And then I'm going to be cutting the walls for my setting. So I'm kind of looking at the lines created by my stones here, and I'm trying as much as I can to follow those lines and be parallel with them, so I'm not kind of cutting my setting skew. And you can always do some sanding to clean things up, so when in doubt, leave yourself a little extra material. I'm just cutting straight down. So then at this point, you can kind of see in this pre-made one that I've done, I do also go ahead and follow the corners there. So I'm going to be trimming those just to give myself a general shape established. Again, I'll be using my medium sanding stick to clean this up some and even things out. And sometimes in the process of this, just from like pulling your blade away, you might kind of distort things. So just to finish things up, I do go back one more time and just make sure we're setting properly in that seat there. And then at this point, we're going to take this off to dry. So while that seat for my setting is drying, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving by creating the band for this ring. I'm going to be rolling a snake to 5 cards thickness. I use the thickness frames as a way to support my snake maker when I'm rolling coils. That way I know that my coil is going to be one even depth. So I'm applying some downward pressure while I'm dragging back and forth to create a coil. Oh, I kind of pushed too hard there. You can see he kind of flattened out. I usually will kind of come in and repinch that to give the snake maker something to catch again, so I can kind of correct that area. Looks like I actually have a little bit too much material here, kind of filling my frame. I'm going to trim some off and keep going. I'm doing 5 cards thickness because I kind of like the look of a thinner band going into this, but obviously you could make your band thicker if you'd like. I wouldn't go much thinner than 5 cards though. I think that would be kind of pushing it for durability sake for your ring band. All right. When you can kind of hear that kind of drag, usually that means you're all the way down and against, and your coil is to your proper thickness. So at this point, I'm going to set my frame off to the side. I'm going to come in with a tough card, and I'm working with these silicone ring mandrels today. I absolutely love these for making rings. For something like this, just a simple band, I just set them down flat on my work surface, and then I'm going to be wrapping around it. And I do leave a little bit of room because this clay does shrink as the water in the clay evaporates as it dries. It's going to shrink a little bit. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a gap for the clay to shrink. There's a little bit of room there. I come in with my tissue blade and make sure you can see this. Kind of line it up straight here and just cut in. So then at this point, I've got a damp brush. I'm going to line up these ends. I'm going to smooth this out. I'm not worried too much about my seam because I am going to be kind of cutting and only using a portion of this band, so I can cut out my seam if it isn't looking too great. But I just want to connect this clay so that it stays as a circle form while I'm working. So we're going to take this off to the heat to join our seat, and we're going to make some finishing touches elements. So at my home studio, I usually go ahead and just make a ton of these all at once, and then I just have them living in jars, and they're ready to go when I need them for projects like this. But if you are working and you don't have any pre-made, a really quick way to make a couple is to scoop up some clay with your palette knife, and then you're going to press down and in to fill a couple, and then just drag across to clean them up. For today's project, I'm working with this 6mm Guardian Star, and I only need 2. So at this point, I'd have my elements ready to go. You can speed these up by drying them by also taking them off to the heat. Before things start coming together, we have one more element that we need to build for our ring, and that's going to be these little accent settings off to the side here. I'm going to be doing my kind of tube set method, and I'm going to briefly cover how I do it today, but if you would like a more in-depth explanation of this process, there's a whole video about setting small stones in precious metal clay that I did where I walk you through this process with more explanation on what I'm up to. But really briefly, just like how I made my ring band, I rolled out a little snake. Since I'm working with a 2mm stone today, I rolled my snake to be 12 cards thick. And I'm going to start off by generally cutting it to size with a scalpel. Always cut tall, because you're going to be doing some sanding, and you can always remove material as needed. So this is where the miter cutting jig comes into place. I'm going to be using it to hold that coil in place. And it also has a true flat surface to it, and I'm going to use that to make sure the top of my setting is going to be nice and flat. So I've got my medium sanding stick, and I'm sanding that surface flat. And then at this point, I'm going to scoot my coil up actually a little bit. I find it's kind of easier, for whatever reason, for me to find center when it's not setting so low in the vise. And I start off with my drill bit here, and what size drill bit you use is going to be kind of determined by the size of your stone, but you're basically just using it to create a hole to use to center your cutting burr. So make sure you're keeping it kind of perpendicular with this flat surface. And I usually will kind of poke, and then I kind of end up coming straight over top of it to look straight down to see if it looks like it's about center. A little more this way, and then I'm going to drill straight down into my piece here. And again, I'm kind of making myself a little mini tube setting here, just a precious metal clay tube setting. I'm going to dust away so we can see what we're up to. And then I'm coming in with a 2mm setting burr to match the 2mm profile of my stone, using the hole I just made to center it, and cutting straight down. I like to kind of test the fit often with this. In this case, you are looking for the girdle of your stone to be below the material here. So I'll put it in. Sometimes it helps to use kind of the flat back of your tweezer to make sure it's sitting nice and flat. And then what I'll do is I'll either bring this up to eye level or I'll come down to it. And I'm checking to see if it looks like my girdle is under. Looks like we're almost there, but not quite. So we're gonna come back out. And I bet just one more twist will get us there. Since these stone cutting burrs are designed to cut sintered or actually finished machine milled metal, they cut metal clay in its grainware state very quickly. So it doesn't take too much work to cut a nice deep seat. And that's looking good. So at this point, just for the sake of keeping my stone put while I'm assembling this project, I'm going to dampen the seat here and then put my stone back in, and that's just going to keep the CZ in place while I'm working. All right, so I'm going to repeat that. So I've got 2, and then we're ready to bring things together. So I have all the components in my ring dry and ready to go, but before I start building things, I'm going to spend a little bit of time refining the setting. The back at this point, the circle got kind of distorted just from the displacement of the clay as the stone got pushed down into the setting. And I don't know, I would like to kind of clean that up a little bit. And you can do that 2 ways. You can either use a needle file to kind of square this up if you want the azure to follow the shape of the stone. I'm not really too worried about it. So while I want it to look nice, I don't think it has to follow the shape of my stone. I'm going to be using a larger precision hole punch this time to just kind of cut out and follow the initial circle there a little bit, just to clean things up. Punching straight down and coming up. And that's just going to look a little better from the back. So then at this point, I'm going to bring in an extra tough card to sand over. I'm just going to be truing up these walls and kind of cleaning up the bottom here. And I'm using the sanding stick for this instead of a sanding pad because I'm refining the form. I love the sanding pads for getting into small areas and for following shapes, but because they do have a give and they're not rigid, they're not great for reestablishing flat faces. So I'm using my sanding stick for this. And then one more thing that we have to do at this point, I said before, you don't want the girdle of your stone to be under the clay, and at this point it is. So we're going to be shortening our setting. And to do that, we're going to be removing material from the top here. The easiest way I found to do this and to keep it nice and flat is to take your sanding stick and place it down. And then you're going to be moving your setting in small little figure eights. And that's going to keep you from kind of applying pressure too much on one side. We're going to be distributing our pressure nice and evenly this way. And again, this removes material pretty quickly too. So dust and check often. Still kind of sitting down in a little bit more than I would like. And it's just sitting on top there. So when you're happy with the fit of the stone and the general shape of your setting, you're going to want to go ahead and use the sanding pads. Start off with superfine to remove the scratches made by the sanding stick, and then you work your way to ultrafine and then finally microfine. I find that it's a little bit easier to do sanding and cleanup when you're able to just kind of hold the setting and rotate it, as opposed to when you're holding it on a ring. It's just easier to get it all cleaned up before we attach it. So spend some time with your sanding pads and then let's start building our ring. So I went ahead and shaped and sanded my setting, and now I'm ready to attach it to my ring band here. Again, you can kind of see that place where my band was joined, but I'm not really worried about that because I'm going to be cutting this band and altering it anyways. I'm scooting it back on my mandrel a little bit. That way there's room for me to kind of rest my setting. And at this point I'm going to kind of rotate and make sure it looks like this is straight. That looks pretty good. And I usually kind of let the stone fall out at this point, and then I set this on top to kind of get an idea of where I'm going to be cutting my band. And what I'm looking for is I'm wanting to make sure that this setting is kind of centered generally. But I'm just going to hold it as a guide, and I'm going to use my scalpel to kind of wiggle and give myself a little notch and cut. And then I come back over and reposition that setting. Give myself kind of notch. All right. So again, at this point, I'm kind of trying to visualize keeping this all one band and keeping things lined up. And I've got my syringe here with the medium tip. And then a damp brush with some water. And I'm going to dampen this edge here. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of syringe on that edge. And I'm going to kind of nestle my setting here in between the two sides. And again, I'm going to kind of check it to see where my setting is sitting, and just doing my best to line everything up and have this setting on straight. So that looks pretty good, and at this point you can either set it on the mandrel stand to dry. If you don't have one of those and you're still wanting to use heat, sometimes I'll take my tweezers and I'll kind of put it in the back there, and then that allows it to kind of rest like that and dry as well. But you want to make sure that this is going to stay put and not shift on you while you're applying all the other elements, so you want to allow this to dry thoroughly before we move on. So my connection here from my seat to my band has dried, and I'm ready to kind of set the stone, sort of. As you can see on the one that I'm wearing, the Guardian Star element kind of comes up and over the sides here, and that in combination with this seat being made from the stone being pushed into the clay, it fits it perfectly. So it's going to support it on the sides here and keep it from coming out once you get these elements over top the stone as well. So at this point, it's best to kind of practice. I take my element and I kind of get a sense for what I'm looking for here. In this case, this element is really convenient because it's got a lot of lines that you can kind of use to center. There's this natural point here, and that's kind of a middle area, and I try to line that up with this outside edge of my setting. So at this point, what I do is I kind of dampen my top edge here. And I'm going to set this down for a minute. And I'm going to take some syringe and I'm going to apply it to the back of my element here. I'm going to flip it over to grab it with tweezers. Get my stone back in there. And I'm kind of just letting it fall at this point. And then I'm going to do some tapping to kind of negotiate its positioning. I'm going to kind of bring it up to eye level so I can kind of make sure that this is coming over this nicely. And then before this has too much time to set up and dry, I'm going to apply some syringe to the other element as well and get it kind of tentatively set. That way I can kind of go back and forth and make sure things are looking symmetrical here. So again, kind of like before, how I was saying there's a lot of natural lines you can use on this element to help you center. I'm kind of looking at this point here and looking down to make sure it looks like that's lining up with that band. Checking this side as well. And then just making sure that these elements are also coming across onto my stone and applying a little bit of pressure to, again, we're kind of relying on this stone to keep, or sorry, we're relying on these elements to keep the stone from being able to kind of rock back and forth out of this seat. So I'm pretty happy with that positioning there. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the ring kind of upside down and send a little bit of syringe underneath that element there. And then with my damp brush, kind of drag it into fill. And kind of pushing it up and under there. And then kind of just pulling up to remove the excess. I'm going to repeat that on this side. Kind of pushing in, dragging up. And that's just to kind of support its positioning and keep it from kind of sinking down as I continue to build this ring. So then at this point, I've got these little side accent stones that are going to fit in right there. And kind of like on those ones, I'm going to add the syringe to the element and then place it. And how high or low these kind of accent settings are is completely up to you. On mine, it's kind of sitting at the level of the point of that stone there, but maybe you want it a little bit lower to kind of transition from the setting to the band a little bit more. It's completely up to you how tall these little accent settings are. Again, here's my little tube setting upside down. Gonna add a little blob of syringe there and position. All right, I think that looks pretty good. I'm gonna quickly do some smoothing out with a brush, and then I'm gonna allow this to completely dry. Just because I am going to be filling in with a little more syringe to transition these elements together, but if it's not dry when I do that, they're going to end up moving on me, and I want to make sure I'm not having to constantly reposition things. So now that the positioning of everything has been established, I'm ready to kind of come in with some more syringe to transition all the elements together. I'm going to start off by kind of taking some syringe and filling from this point of the guardian star and then down. Kind of see how I take that point and I kind of drag it down and continue it and kind of blend it in there. And I'm also going to be filling in between the tube setting and that point that I'm going to be creating there. So I'm kind of taking my syringe and I'm starting it at that point and I'm kind of just dragging down. And I've got my damp brush and I'm pulling up kind of complete that line. I add a little bit more material because there's still kind of a gap there. And I'm going to push kind of in between this tube setting there and that edge. I'm going to drag up again to kind of follow that point. So we're just kind of blending the elements here. There's a little bit of an edge there. My setting was kind of wider than my band. So I'm going to fill that in. And then even here, kind of between the setting itself and the band, I'm going to add some material to kind of round that out and transition that space as well. So we're really just using the syringe to kind of additively sculpt this band here and kind of transition all these patched together elements into one piece. So I'm going to repeat that on this side and then again on this opposite side of the ring, and then allow it to dry. Alright, so you can kind of see how I've blended these shapes together with syringe, and now at this point, you know, it's kind of rough looking, but that's where the sanding pads come in. So I've got my superfine that I'm going to be using for most of the material removal. And I'm just working to kind of blend out any lines in my syringe. And again, kind of just even out the form here. And just refining the shape. Once things are starting to blend a little bit better, just like usual, we're going to move on to the ultrafine before the microfine to get a really nice finish. Because with this ring, once it was sintered, I just put it in the tumbler and it came up to a really nice shine. So again, just keep on spending time with your sanding pads until you're really happy with the look of your piece. Once you're done sanding your ring and you're happy with the finish, you're going to want to dust off any remaining silver particles before cleaning your stones with alcohol. Then you're ready to fire. I fire these rings in a dish with support like vermiculite or alumina hydrate. Since I'm working with EZ960, I fired this ring at 1675 for 2 hours. As a side note, I made it a size 9 and it shrunk to a size 7, so when you're making these rings, don't forget to size them up about 2 sizes. Once my ring was fired, I polished it up by putting it in a tumbler. I'm really happy with how this ring turned out. This style of setting is a really simple way to elegantly set a stone. I used the Guardian Star Finishing Touches mold because I liked how there was a natural opportunity to set another accent stone in kind of the inset there of the corner. But you can use any Finishing Touches mold you like, and Cool Tools has lots of different styles available. Maybe you want to use them on the corners of your stones, or put them on all 4 sides. Really, there's so many opportunities that you can adapt this style to your own tastes. There are so many ways that you can adapt this setting style to your own tastes, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how you incorporate the setting style into your own work. Thanks for watching.